the Fantasy Source Football Podcast. My name is David A. Arnott, sitting here with George Winkler. Just a reminder, Fantasy Source Baseball Podcast still going on, happening on Thursdays these days. But Tuesdays, we're going to be doing Fantasy Source Football Podcast. And there's a certain amount of joy to the ones that we're doing today and probably for the next couple of weeks because we know that now that we are going to have a football season.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's perfect timing for today's Fantasy Source Football Podcast.
You know what? We don't get much SEO by saying it in a podcast. It has to actually appear on the website if we keep saying Fantasy Source Football Podcast. But you know what? Let's get to the point. We're talking about the AFC North today. A lot of stuff going on in Baltimore that we've been seeing over the past day or two of them just seemingly cutting everybody. Pittsburgh has a few questions about their team, even though I think pretty much everyone agrees that they're going to be the class of the division. And then down at the bottom, you've got what may actually be a poor situation getting worse in Cincinnati. And then in Cleveland, they had all their coaching drama. Who knows what that's going to turn into, but hopefully we can provide some clarity.
Yeah, and let's start with the Steelers, since you said they are the class of the division. And Ben Roethlisberger is the guy that you want to lead off with there. And, you know, he missed 4 games last year, and he still surpassed 3,000 yards passing and had almost 20 touchdown passes. So, you know, you figure a full season out of Big Ben this year, you're looking at him to bounce back. If you want to wait for a quarterback, he's the perfect guy to do that with.
To me, Roethlisberger and Hines Ward, in past years at least, not this year, but in past years, have been very similar on the quarterback and wide receiver scales in the sense that you always look at what they've produced and you say, you know what, I think I can get somebody better. But then on the other hand, you always think to yourself, I think that guy is most likely to actually achieve what he did last year. There's a certain level of security in knowing that he's going to be there for you.
I think you're right. I think Big Ben is secure, and I think 85% of the time you're going to throw him out there and start him. Another thing going for the Steelers this year is they have a pretty favorable schedule. They're going to match up with the NFC West, so you know he's going to be going against some pretty porous pass defenses, especially down the stretch.
What do you think about Rashard Mendenhall? He seems to be a guy who's always, well, since he basically won the job in Pittsburgh, has been considered on the edge of the elite running backs, sometimes drafted in the first round, sometimes in the second. Never really dropping, never really breaking through. How do you see him going forward?
Well, I really like Rashard Mendenhall, and I think it's worth taking a chance on him in the middle of the first round, and it's because of his consistency. We do a consistency rating for the Fantasy Football Yearbook, and Mendenhall was the 4th most consistent back. Now, you match that up with his production. He was 8th overall in production. But there's something to be said for that week-to-week thing that you can count on from your fantasy back.
Now, taking that in mind, would you consider him a safer pick than, say, Steven Jackson, a guy who is on a Rams team that is now on yet another offensive coordinator? I think it's the 3rd in 3 years. And we're not exactly certain just how good they are, even though previously he's been considered one of the elite backs.
I think as long as it's not a PPR league, I think you're safe going with Mendenhall because of the touchdowns. Double-digit touchdowns last year, and the Steelers still have a group of wide receivers who are on the small side. Their tight end isn't a huge part of the red zone offense, so Mendenhall's going to get the ball more often than not in the red zone.
Talking about PPR, a guy who seems to be gaining a lot of ground, was gaining a lot of ground over the past few years, Ray Rice. I mean, this is a guy who, if I recall correctly, was a consensus top 5 pick last year. Do you see it again this year? Even though it might not. I don't know what you see from him. I've known people that are saying no longer.
Well, the concern with him is the touchdowns. He only had 5 rushing touchdowns last year. But you see that the Ravens are thinking about cutting McGahee, who was one of the goal line people who would compete for touches with Rice. So if McGahee doesn't come back at a reduced rate after they cut him, then Ray Rice is looking at perhaps more touches in the red zone. And I still think it's too early to write him off. He's still a great back, an all-around back, dynamite in PPR leagues, and he's one of his team's workhorse back.
Well, you mentioned the touchdown vulturing that Willis McGahee did, and then the Ravens are still thinking about dropping him, even though they seemed to be happy with him in that role last year. They also appear to be considering dropping Derek Mason. Now, that could be great news for Anquan Boldin, but of course, a lot of people still aren't really sold on Joe Flacco being the kind of quarterback that they really need. What do you see about how the receivers are going to break down, and then after that, Flacco?
Well, if Mason doesn't come back, they're going to have to go with a young guy from Maryland, Torrey Smith, and that could hurt Flacco. We expected big things out of Flacco and a big jump. It didn't really materialize. His yards only went up slightly. His touchdowns did increase pretty good, but he's a guy who's right at the fringe of starting quarterbacks in fantasy, and until the Ravens either pick up a receiver or decide to go with a less conservative offense, he's probably going to be a guy that maybe you start 75% of the time, but you need to find somebody else for the rest of the time.
So you're definitely saying that if you get Flacco, whether you draft him or you just end up with him in some way, shape, or form, definitely got to have a second quarterback to play the matchups.
Yeah, I mean, Flacco is right now, I think he's ranked 12th among our quarterbacks, so that puts him as the last starter in the league. So, you might want to think a round or two later to add your backup.
Well, if we're going to be talking about quarterbacks, got to talk about the Bengals and the Browns. So let's start with the Bengals. They've drafted Andy Dalton, I believe, in the second round. A lot of questions about him coming out of TCU. It seemed that every single scout that was talking about Dalton being a starting caliber quarterback talked about his leadership ability, didn't really talk about his physical attributes. It's a weird situation considering Carson Palmer is kind of in a stalemate with them, whether or not he's going to be brought back to start, because he says he's only going to start wherever he goes. How do you see this breaking down? And if you do see Dalton starting, is he worth even just a flyer?
This could be a complete disaster. I mean, Carson Palmer wants to get traded. I still think he has at least a couple years left on him as far as production, but the ownership won't budge. They don't want to give him his wishes. So it sounds like what's going to transpire is Palmer will have to retire and maybe come back later, and what the Bengals will be left with is Dalton and an inexperienced receiving corps beyond Ocho Cinco, and with no time to get ready for the season. So no, I'm not really looking at big things from Dalton. And, the one thing they said out of him is he's smart and he's accurate. Well, that's great, but you also need the big arm to make throws, and you need more experience to make an immediate impact in fantasy leagues.
To be fair, Alex Smith was also very smart and very accurate. Let's talk about their running backs. Cedric Benson, one of the most surprising guys from last year, considering how he'd essentially washed out with the Bears. Do you see him coming back again? I mean, he's already he's got a propensity to get in trouble, whether it's real or just reported upon. Do you see him repeating what he did last year?
Well, it's going to be hard, especially if he gets suspended, and that's the big fear with him. He's still an underrated back, though. I mean, as far as workhorse backs are concerned, he was the fourth best in the NFL. He got 75% of his team's carries last year. He's still under 30 years old, and that's something. But with the suspension looming, you have to view him more as your number 3 back. I think that's as high as you can go with him.
So hope that you're in a league that has a later draft date so that you actually know that information. With the Browns, they've got an entirely new coaching staff. Eric Mangini is out. Pat Shurmur is in. Shurmur, I'm as the person who wrote the Cleveland Browns preview for Fantasy Source Football, I am absolutely fascinated that Shurmur was the Rams offensive coordinator last year, and they basically dumped the ball off every single play. I mean, Sam Bradford had very few yards per attempt, despite completing about 60% of his passes. So if Colt McCoy follows suit, and the Browns follow suit, they could be very useful in PPR leagues, and then at the same time, not really useful at all in non-PPR leagues.
Yeah, I mean, I think the move to the more conservative offense will help Colt McCoy in an NFL standpoint. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know whether that will translate to fantasy points, but I think McCoy doesn't have the strongest arm in the world, so if he gets into a timing offense like Shermer's, I think he could do well with some big receivers like Massaquoi, who's in his third season. He could be perfect for that. But as far as going for something big in fantasy, you're still talking about Peyton Hillis in Cleveland.
Yeah, what do you see for Hillis this year? I mean, he was a fullback in college. He did a little bit of feature back running in Denver, but a lot of this, the production just seemed to come out of nowhere.
Yeah, and a lot of people are going to be worried about Hillis and Arian Foster. Are they one-year wonders? I don't think Hillis is. You mentioned Shermer's offense's propensity to dump off. Well, who's going to catch those balls? It's going to be Peyton Hillis. He's very good at it. He was fourth among backs in receptions last year. He's still good in the goal line because he was a fullback. So the only thing I worry about with him is he has to face the Ravens and the Steelers twice a year. But other than that, I like Peyton Hillis.
Are you worried at all that he's going to get actually an increased load this year? Because he really wasn't a starter for the first 2 games out of the season.
Well, they've actually been talking about scaling back his load a bit as long as players like Montario Hardesty are healthy and can offset some of the carries. But until those guys prove it, I'm still thinking they're going to give the ball to Peyton Hillis, and Shermer had no problem giving the ball to Steven Jackson last year.
All right, George, that's the AFC North. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.